Ladies and gents, this is Rex, and this is Europe the First Crusade, Siege of Antioch, Extra History Part 5 of the channel Extra Hits. Yes, in the last part we saw how Crusaders basically defeated, Muslim army at that point, right? They basically attacked their camps, surprisingly, but still the knights held out. So far this has been really fucked up, but I think now it's starting to get more stabilized, right? Earlier parts were just ridiculous. The People's Crusade, right? They just just said it like, anybody who basically takes arms, right? They have free ticket to heaven or something like that. Everybody came with their pitchforks and shit, right? And that was just ridiculous. They just raided their own towns, their own Christian towns, everything around Hungary and everywhere, pissed everybody off. And at the time I said, like, okay, probably, all those in Jerusalem and, Ottomans basically at the point, Muslims are basically at the point are just seeing that and thinking, okay, they are not much of a real threat, right? I mean, they can't do nothing. Later on, when the real soldiers came with the princes and everything, real crusade started, around that time, Muslims were thinking these are the same people, so that they're played as an advantage to the Crusaders. They went way too close before Muslims took them seriously, I guess. So yeah. Wait a minute, Ottomans were a thing around this? I don't know, which year is it? This is, I don't know. In short, Muslim forces, right? They are basically gonna go against this separate princes and separate armies that are acting as one crusade. Even that, I said it like, eventually they are going to fight amongst themselves, because there is no one single leader. And that maybe that he could have, the guy who basically started all these things, right, the emperor of Byzantium, maybe he could have led them, right, since he's the one who started all this. But no, everybody has their own army. I don't know, I feel like in the end it's going to be all chaos. So let's watch this one.
After the Battle of Derilium, the way lay open to the south, towards Antioch, towards Jerusalem. But the Turks, though beaten, were far from broken. In their retreat, they stripped the land and laid waste to anything they couldn't take with them. And as the crusade moved south, the heat intensified. Kilij Arslan, the Seljuk Sultan, had ordered the wells along the path destroyed, and in the sun-scorched plains of Anatolia, thirst began to stalk the ranks of the crusade. Parched animals laid by the roadside to die. Men chewed thorns for moisture. The crusade left a trail of the dead. But finally the crusade crossed into the fertile valleys of Iconium, where they restocked and made the trek across to Heraclea. Here the Council of Princes met to discuss their next move. Two paths lay open to them. One dangerous but quicker through the Taurus Mountains, and the other a slower but less risky path over the confusingly named Anti-Taurus Mountains. The majority of the army chose to follow the safer route, but Tancred and Baldwin set out on the harder trek. Tancred brought a few hundred knights with him, while Baldwin detached over 2,000 soldiers from his brother Godfrey's army for the adventure. Tancred's group set off first, and soon came upon the port town of Tarsus. After quickly driving the garrison back into the city, he realized he had a problem. He had nowhere near enough men to take a walled city like Tarsus, so Tancred sent word back to his uncle Bohemond to send along reinforcement. But as the rider was heading back to the main force with the message, Tancred had a flash of brilliance. He quickly had his men surround the town and make it look like they were preparing for a siege. Then he sent word to the Turkish garrison that he was but the vanguard of an enormous force of crusaders who would soon sweep over Tarsus and do horrible things to any Turks defending its walls. Most of the Turkish garrison quietly snuck out of the town that night. The rest offered to surrender in the morning. Now, you remember a couple episodes ago how Tancred had managed to slip through Constantinople without swearing an oath to the Byzantine emperor? Well, the garrison flew Tancred's banner over the town, and he declared it his city. This lasted all of about 15 minutes before Baldwin arrived. Baldwin, who was much less concerned with subtlety, and apparently oaths, saw the banner and basically said, "Hey, what a fabulous idea. I love it. But I have 2,000 men, so why don't you let me have that city instead?" Tancred grumbled under his breath about how he had both beaten back the garrison and tricked them into abandoning the city, but he...
Oh my god, they're already doing this, like bigger army mentality, politics basically. I have a bigger army, so this city is mine now. They're already somewhat in fighting. This is not going to end well, I bet, right? And this is 11th century, right? 11th or 10th century, so obviously Ottomans were not a thing. So, which empire is this? Turks? Or are they just, separate kingdoms of Turks with different kings and emperors who just took over this area, Jerusalem and everyone? I don't know, because I'm pretty sure Ottomans were not a thing around this time.
He couldn't really fault Baldwin's logic. 2,000 was indeed more than a few hundred. So he packed up his camp and grumpily started to head east. With Tancred gone, Baldwin's banner now flew over the city. But guess who shows up? The reinforcements Tancred had sent for before coming up with that ruse to take the city. Now, these men must have been a little miffed to have trekked all that way for nothing, but Baldwin, never a very secure man and never one to miss an opportunity to add insult to injury, refused to even let them into the city for the night, instead forcing them to take camp outside the city walls. Then, to add real injury to injury, remember how the Turkish garrison had slipped out in the middle of the night? Well, they were still out there, and in the middle of the night, they descended on the Crusaders camped outside the walls and slaughtered them as they slept. Those Turks really got a lot done at the middle of the night. Bunch of night owls. As you can imagine, when the town...
Now what the fuck? What is this? What is happening? First of all, these two separate princes and their armies are part of the Crusade. Can they get along for the fucking Crusade before... At least take Jerusalem before doing any of this shit? Right? The guy didn't swear anything to the Byzantine Empire, sure, so he take over the city. Other guy comes like, okay, but I have a bigger army. I'm gonna take now. And basically, makes him like, get out of my city. Reinforcement come, he doesn't even let in. I get it, it's your city, but at least let them in. They are your fellow Crusaders. He doesn't take them in, right? And now the Turks who are just lingering there slaughters them. This is just chaotic. How, I bet before they even reach Jerusalem, they're going to fight each other by the end, right? Because this already feels like this.
Woke up and saw a few hundred dead Crusaders outside. Well, no one was very happy with Baldwin. In response, he heroically locked himself in a building and refused to come out until people calmed down. Tancred, meanwhile, was off conquering the next town. This time, though, when Baldwin caught up and arrived outside the walls, things went a little differently. Tancred had augmented his force with local Armenian volunteers, and by the time Baldwin showed up at this new city, Tancred was well entrenched inside the city walls. So, when Baldwin asked to be let in, it was Tancred's turn to say, nah, I think you get to sleep outside. But, not content with letting Baldwin get off so lightly after letting their compatriots die, some of Tancred's knights ended up charging Baldwin's camp, and the Crusaders started a brawl outside the newly conquered city. And then, Baldwin basically wandered off and abandoned the crusade. Baldwin headed east. He met an heirless king. He got the heirless king to adopt him. He promptly let the heirless king be assassinated. He ordered the man who introduced him to said king, who was theoretically his friend, to be tortured to death, and he declared himself Count of Edessa. And thus, the first Crusader state is born. Oh, and in case you're wondering, yes, Edessa had once been part of the Byzantine Empire. Yes, Baldwin
Okay, this is just fucking ridiculous. I thought this is gonna stabilize, right? In the past, fourth part of this video, I said this is gonna stabilize. I was expecting it to be stabilized here. Baldwin just fucks everything up. I just said that they're gonna fight by the end, but as soon as I said it, literally in seconds, they fight. Crusaders fight with each other. Baldwin like, fuck that, and just walks off somewhere else. Thinking, oh, I'm not getting treated right by these Crusaders. I'm not part of the Crusade, and just walks off somewhere else. Takes over the place. And that place belongs to Byzantine Empire, so I guess, he's gonna fight with him in the future. See, this is what I was talking about. If you don't have one singular leader that is leading everyone and promising them benefits along the way, and everybody trusts this one particular leader, you can't have an army, right? Turks are gonna win, I guess, in the end, because there's going to be way too many infighting inside this. Only stable guy I think that is that Prince of Flanders, right? Because he didn't make any mistakes so far, and he feels like more stable guy. I don't know. I guess he's gonna be proven to be more, more stable, competent in the end. I don't know. This feels chaotic.
Had sworn the oath, and no, he was not going to give it back. And not to spoil future series, but he ends up becoming king of Jerusalem. Anyway, Tancred, meanwhile, rejoined the main crusade, and captured a few more towns relevant to the effort along the way. When he rejoined, though, the crusade was a bit worse for wear. Mail armor and mountain climbing don't mix, and the safer road through the Antioch mountains had only proven to be slightly safer. At this point, they'd lost most of their horses to the heat, and abandoned much of their armor in the mountains. And in front of them stood the great and ancient city of Antioch. A city founded under Alexander, made great by Rome, and fortified by Justinian. It was the last great obstacle between the Crusaders and Jerusalem. But the massive walls constructed by Justinian were too much for the Crusaders. The walls, which flew off from the city like wings high into the mountains.
I mean, these are Romans we are talking about, right? You can't test that shit.
Mountains made the city impossible to encircle. The massive stones and impressive towers Justinian's men had built were more than these Crusaders could breach. So the Crusaders decided on a plan, albeit one of the oddest siege plans I've ever heard of. They were going to have contingents blockade most but not quite all of the city's gates, which would seem to defeat the point of a siege, but some of those gates lay high atop the nearby mountains, and others lay behind a river which would split the Crusaders' forces, so the Crusaders decided to simply block what gates they could and wait. But as the weeks and then months passed and fall turned into winter, the Crusade began to starve. The local area was stripped
Yeah, it's like saying that, I have a pipe leak in my house, and I fixed 90% of the leak. Well, 90% don't mean shit because the remaining 10% still going to leak out. You're going to lose all your water. You have to block everything, otherwise it doesn't work.
So any foraging party would have to go far afield and risk being ambushed if they were to resupply the army. So the princes decided on a daring plan. Bohemond and Robert of Flanders would take a sizable part of the army with them to forage in force, while the remnants of the Crusader army would try to maintain the siege. So Robert and Bohemond headed off, but as their foraging party reached the tiny village of Albara, what did they see? A large Muslim army marching down the very road to Antioch they were heading up to forage. The Muslim force was as surprised as the Crusaders, and after a few minutes of everyone just blinking at each other in shock, the Crusaders, though outnumbered and laden with forage, charged. When the dust cleared, many were dead on both sides. There was no clear victor, and the Crusaders had lost all the forage they'd set out to acquire. But, in one of the strange twists of luck that accompanied the First Crusade, the commander of the relieving Muslim force, who was never that into being a relieving force, looked at the casualty list and decided, well, so much for that, and packed up his army and went home. Antioch's reinforcements were gone. The Crusaders were still starving, though, and that's not all. There were earthquakes and...
Yeah, why does Turks need Jerusalem, right? It's an important city for the Christians for obvious reasons. Why do Muslims need that city? Can't they just see like this is way more trouble than it's worth? Let's just give it up. Otherwise, Christians will basically, since it's their religion, they are gonna constantly come at us, right? One after another. Why are they just like, okay, fuck it, this is way too much trouble than it's worth. Give up Jerusalem. Maybe it's because if you give up Jerusalem, you're giving a major portion of the area, which is kind of important. I guess that's it. You're giving up Antioch and everything, yeah.
Comets, even auroras. And Crusaders were generally the superstitious type, so after seeing all that, a lot of them began to slink off and abandon the crusade, including none other than Peter the Hermit.
Aurora? Wait a minute, some event happened around that time? Some solar event, I guess. Otherwise, why would you see auroras at that point?
Adhemar quickly hauled some of these recalcitrant crusaders back to Antioch, including Peter, and then followed up with a brilliant plan. He called for a fast to regain the favor of God, which is a pretty clever way to improve morale and solve your supply problems. At long last, and much worse for wear, the Crusaders made it through to spring, and the food situation started to improve. And then Bohemond got tricky. He convinced the leader of the Byzantine contingent that there was a plot to kill him. When the Byzantines reacted by going back to Constantinople, Bohemond accused them of cowardice and abandonment, treacherous behavior which he claimed freed him of his oath to Emperor Komnenos. Now, with another Turkish reinforcing army bearing down on the crusade, he threatened to abandon the siege of Antioch unless he was allowed to keep the city when they took it. Godfrey and Raymond grumbled about this, but there was only so much they could do, as the lesser knights loved Bohemond. You have to give Bohemond some credit, though, because after this, he proceeded to lay out and execute a plan that not only thrashed the Second Turkish Relief Army headed for Antioch, but also inflicted a great number of casualties on the garrison. And thus, the siege survived to drag on into summer. Then the Turks assembled a...
Let's be honest, Bohemond in previous parts has shown his, military brilliance, right? He is competent on the battlefield. But still, they are fighting with each other. Can't you, think about your oath and everything once you take Jerusalem? He's crossing Byzantines and everything. That's just fucked up.
Third great army to relieve Antioch. This one far too large for the Crusaders to meet in open battle. But Bohemond hadn't spent the months idly. He managed to find a guard commander in the city who was bribable. And just before the arrival of the Turkish army, the bribed commander let the Crusaders over the walls in the dead of night. The massacre was horrific and indiscriminate, but by dawn, with many civilians amongst the dead, the Crusaders had captured all of Antioch except the citadel, which stood atop a mountain at the end of its long walls. Join us next time as the besiegers become the besieged, as we witness the epitome of horror, and as, at last, the Crusaders make it to Jerusalem.
Wait a minute, are they going to take over Jerusalem? Because clearly Turks feels like they don't care much, right? They see the casualty list and it always runs away. Because clearly they don't have much of an incentive like the Christians have. Christians trying to take over their holy city, Jerusalem. But, I guess Turks don't care about that, right? But they're just trying to make sure that they take the places around. They don't just, give it up to Christians. I don't know. Are they going to take over Jerusalem? Because right now, to me, it's 50-50, right? Because in the previous part, I thought it's starting to be more stabilized. But now I'm seeing how they are stabbing each other in the back like that. Stabbing the, Byzantine Empire and everything. I don't know. But in the end, are they going to fight with each other and nobody's the victor? Or maybe, at least for the taking of Jerusalem, they are going to put everything aside and take over the place and then stab everyone in the back. But that guy basically, right? I forgot his name, but who basically just said fuck it and just walked off. He's the one who's going to become the king of Jerusalem or something, right? He literally said that. So how is he going to come back? How is he going to sneak his way through? This is just fucked up. Alright, well, that was Europe, the First Crusade, Siege of Antioch by the channel Extra Credits. If you like my Rick's on the phone, like, subscribe. Check out the Rick Sunday, there's a link in the description. Check out the cars of Brazil link cards in here. I'll see you next time.